Are you in the mood for reading something a little different? That's what I just did in today's review of the newly translated in English Japanese murder mystery found footage thriller, which is Uketsu's Strange Pictures. So hello, my name is Zach, and on this channel it's mostly science fiction and fantasy reviews, but also, yes, I delve into any other book that catches my interest, whether it's comics, manga, personal development, or yes, thrillers and mysteries. So today I'm talking about Uketsu's Strange Pictures, newly translated and released in English, which I found of all places on the New York Times book review of upcoming books that caught their eye. And while, yes, I read the New York Times probably more than I should, being caught up in the doom scrolling of the news and what's going on in the world, I'm usually at odds with their book review section. The type of reader that I think New York Times is targeting is that idealized, sophisticated reader that reads highbrow nonfiction and fiction, and they very rarely recommend science fiction and fantasy, which are the two genres I think I love the most. So when I read these reviews, even their fantasy lists, it's a lot of romantasy, things like that, and not books that I personally love. You rarely see even Lord of the Rings on some of these lists. But anyways, on their new list of upcoming books, I still scan it, I still read it, because yes, maybe there are some good things here and there, like the Bill Gates memoir and some other books, and this one caught my attention, Uketsu's Strange Pictures. So recently I had also read The Devotion of Suspect X, part of the Galileo series, at the recommendation of a friend, and I really enjoyed it. I don't read mysteries and murder mysteries at all. I watch thriller movies, but I don't really read them. Don't know why. Just, a lot of books just aren't that interested for me. I think I'd rather read about fantastical adventures, but this one sounded interesting, especially with the angle of pictures. As a former photographer, I'm a very visual person, so I thought it sounded very intriguing. And having breezed through it, it's a rather short novel, again by fantasy book standards. It was very satisfying. So the premise of the book is that these two university students stumble across a blog that's very cryptic, and they're kind of dissecting it and just discussing what they are reading and what it could be interpreted as. They're part of a mystery club. And as the story goes on, then we see kind of the backstory. So there's kind of this dual narrative that they find a creepy blog and it's describing these people and these events, and they don't really know what to make of it. And you kind of get that unreliable narrator because it's a self-published autobiography blog post, of course, and we're trying to figure out what's going on, what makes it so creepy. And then the rest of the story, it gets really into what actually is happening, what's going on, the backstory of why that went on, and we learn about all the characters involved, and it was kind of a bit of a ride. It's again, maybe I'm outside my genre. Well, I know I'm outside my genre reading these thrillers and fantasies. So maybe some of these are tropes that people that read thrillers and mysteries would understand and maybe catch. But for me, it was kind of new territory, which wasn't a bad thing because it was still interesting. I still could follow along. I've read a few, like I said, mysteries here and there, and it's these maybe tropes of the genre, but learning about a character, and you kind of think it's going one way, but then it sort of goes another way. And in your mind as the reader, you're also, of course, trying to piece it together. So you're coming up with your own theories of, maybe this person did it because of this, but no, that's not really what happened. It's something else. And you're trying to outthink the writer, right? Because you're kind of trying to analyze what they're also trying to get you to think, but they're also trying to subvert the expectations, if that makes sense. So it's that kind of meta game of, yes, you're enjoying the story and the narrative that's going on as these kind of pieces put together, but you're also trying to think one step ahead of the writer and where they're trying to lead you, either intentionally or unintentionally, as you think about possibilities as they present the next piece of the puzzle, as you kind of build the picture of what's going on. And in the end, yes, you do figure out what was happening and why it was happened. And of course, it's a little bit tragic, and you feel for all the characters involved, and they're just part of bad circumstances, and it all, of course, coalesced and led to the events described in kind of the original, or at least alluded to in the original blog post story that the students are describing. And of course, it comes full circle, and it was very interesting. It was satisfying, and the fact that it's a self-contained story was also a positive for me when most fantasy series are trilogies at the least. So it's nice to have that self-contained story that just wraps up its own, all the loose ends are tied up like a movie. Everything just wraps up and finishes in the condensed story, which is about 6-ish hours on audiobook format. So it was a good read. It was a good time. I enjoyed it. If one thing, looking through my notes, that I maybe a negative, not really negative, but the format, because I listened to it as an audiobook and it is a book about pictures. That's kind of one of the core mysteries in the beginning, is the students, in addition to this blog post, are these cryptic pictures that go along with some of the stories, and the pictures interconnect to the larger narrative. So you're supposed to, as a reader yourself, refer to the pictures and kind of figure it out. So I would pause the book a little bit to look at the pictures, and maybe it's a different experience if you're flipping back and forth of the book, or if, I don't know if it's presented in the text, like in line as you're reading to see the pictures. So it does kind of take you out a little bit as they're describing the pictures, which they do a great job. It was okay. I sometimes would go back to look at the pictures a little bit after they described them just to get it fresh in my memory, but it wasn't like I needed to look at it side by side while I was reading it. But it did, I think, enhance the experience, and it adds a little extra layer of mystery because the characters are trying to figure out the pictures and how the pictures piece together to the larger story, and you as the reader of this story are supposed to look at the pictures and also trying to use them in your conclusions of what's going on. So it was an interesting narrative device that, again, even without the supplemental materials, you could kind of deduce what was happening in the pictures. They do describe what the pictures are, what they're supposed to look like. They're on the cover of the book too, so it's not like a spoiler-ish, because the pictures are so vague and mysterious, like the strange pictures in the title, that you don't really, it's not a spoiler to look at the pictures and try and figure out what the plot, because it doesn't, you'll get there if you read it. It doesn't really go with it at all, and it definitely subverts your expectations of what the pictures all mean and how they relate to the story. So very interesting. As myself, again, I enjoyed it as someone who recently read The Devotion of Suspect X, which was my first kind of intro to Japanese murder mystery thrillers. If you're into thrillers, into mysteries, maybe this is already on your radar. If you're into science fiction and fantasy, the other book I read after this is maybe a better fit, because I read Robert Jackson Bennett's The Tainted Cup, which is a fantasy mystery, and that one blew me away, but that's for another review. And I love that book so much. It was one of my definitely top books of the year already. It was just amazing to blend mystery and fantasy. But this book, Uketsu's Strange Pictures, is straight up fantasy thriller, and it was a solid read. So thanks for watching this review of Uketsu's Strange Pictures, and have a great day.